Well, it is to some people. The Orthodox Tewahedo Church has the Book of Jubilees in their Bible canon, and we do have evidence that the Book of Jubilees was considered to be Holy Scripture by some people in the early centuries as well. I do believe that the author of the Book of 2 Peter was inspired by the Book of Jubilees. So anyways, folks, let's see what we have here in the live chat before we get into the thick of it. Okay, so we have Chipmunk says, hello, everyone. Calamento says, shalom to all. Mary says, shalom. And was it earlier? I think Mary said, shalom. Shalom to everyone. Felix says, hi, everyone. Mary says, well, we had our eclipse and we're still here. Wow, I didn't even know that there was an eclipse there in Australia. That's interesting. Was it a full eclipse or was it a partial eclipse? Mary says, angels must still be here. Praise Yah. Amen. Yes. And Chipmunk says, beautiful job, Hannah. Seek the Lord says, shalom. Mary says to Chipmunk, we call them chips down here. All right, chips. All right, I've never heard it that way. Okay. Well, shalom, shalom. Welcome to y'all. Blessings multiplied to you and your families. Hope you're having an awesome evening or day, wherever you are in the world. So tonight, let's get right into it, folks. If you're new here, by the way, and you're wondering what this channel is all about, perhaps you're listening on YouTube or X or some other platform like that, what we are doing here, we are a wonderful fellowship. In fact, you guys that are listening to this, especially those of you who are faithful here and the members of this channel and such, you guys are an amazing fellowship. In my view, you guys are the gold of the world. You guys are just amazing people. We love to gather here virtually, if you will, every night, going through the scriptures, reading it, discussing it, studying together, learning from each other. And so if that's something that, interests you, make sure that you're subscribed, make sure you're following. If you are a returning viewer and you say, you know what, Christopher, I kind of like some of the stuff here, or maybe you learned some stuff, maybe you got some value from the channel, please seriously consider supporting the channel. We put a lot, I put everything into this actually, put a lot into this, a lot of work goes into this, and a lot of money goes into this from my own pockets, but thank you for those of you who are helping support as well. Really, if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be here. Honestly, it's not just something I'm saying, it honestly is the truth. We just wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you guys that are supporting. So anyway, if you're new here and you find value here, please seriously consider supporting. You can do that by becoming a member of the channel, going over to Subscribe Star as well. Subscribe Star doesn't take as much of a cut as YouTube does, so more money goes to where you want it to go to, if you will, if you use Subscribe Star as opposed to YouTube. But if you decide to use YouTube, that's fine as well, whatever works better for you. And it helps us to keep everything up, paying the bills, and keep everything going here as much as possible. I remember when we first started out doing live streams every night, you'd be surprised what I was using as equipment. I had an old computer, like 13 years old or something like that. It was a super old computer, old equipment. Everything was just old and used. If you go check out some of the old live streams from 5 years ago, you'll see we had lots of technical difficulties and lots of problems. I was able to upgrade a lot of the equipment because of those of you who support this, where it helps us to pay the bills. and all that kind of stuff. There are bills here that you guys don't know about, all of the different tools that we use here, and all that kind of stuff. So anyways, folks, thank you again for the members of the channel. Thank you for those of you who are supporting on Subscribestar. Much needed and much appreciated. Thank you again, and thank you on behalf of everyone who's blessed by what we do here. Okay, so let's see. Oh, in the live chat, before we get into the thick of it here, Mary says, "Blessings, Christopher. It was up North Pole area, apparently. It was just black down here, as it was night." Wow. Okay, yeah, I remember we had a full solar eclipse here. What was it, about a year and a half ago or something like that here where I am? It was a full solar eclipse. It was really, really amazing to witness. Amazing. Yeah. Thank you for sharing, Mary. I really appreciate that. So tonight, let's pick up where we left off. And well, tonight we're also going to get into, this is episode 7, the Book of Jubilees, in the beginning again. Genesis chapter 1 has no angels in it. Jubilees puts them on day 1, according to the Book of Jubilees. So this is a study in Second Temple literature. So, yeah, Genesis let's go to Genesis chapter 34. This is where we left off. I didn't get to Genesis 34 last night, but pretty much where we left off last night. Genesis chapter 34, and we read about this this young lady by the name of Dinah, or Dinah, however you want to pronounce her name, and she's Jacob's daughter by Leah, and she's named in the first verse, and then she's spoken about in 30 more verses. And she never speaks in this passage, not even once. Everything that happens next is done by men, argued by men, and settled by men. That silence is in the text. It's worth noticing before we go any further. So if we read just the first few verses here, Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she bore to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. Shechem, the son of Hamor. Now, isn't that Hamor? Isn't that Hebrew for donkey? I'm not all that familiar with that. Can somebody look that up? Hamor in Hebrew. What does that mean? Maybe one of you, if you could, just look that up for me and let me know if I'm correct. I might be off on that, but again, I'm just going by memory here. Hamor, I think it means donkey. Let me know if I'm correct or not there in the live chat, if you would. Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her. He took her, lay with her, and humbled her. Okay, so Shechem, that's the man's name. And it's also the name of the city. He takes her, violates her, and then the chapter does something that makes it much harder than a straightforward crime narrative. He wants to marry her. His father comes to Jacob and proposes a treaty. Our families and yours. One people, trade, land, intermarriage between us. Now remember what we said about the Book of Jubilees and how it's so against an intermarriage. This is Genesis, where we are here. So we're going to compare a little bit. Jacob's sons comes in from the fields, and the text says that they were grieved, very angry. And then we go down to verse 13. It says, the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father with deceit, when they spoke because he had defiled Dinah, their sister. Deceit. So the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor, his father, deceitfully. The text tells you straight out before anything happens. It doesn't leave you to work it out. It doesn't leave anything to the imagination, so to speak, here. What follows is a trap, and Genesis labels it as one before it springs. They propose circumcision, every male in the city. Then will be one people, they say. And, the men of the city agree to it. Now let's go down to verse 25 and 26. It says, on the third day, when they were sore, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword, came upon the unsuspecting city, and killed all the males. Verse 26, they killed Hamor and Shechem his son with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house, and went away. Just really violent, if you will. Okay, so the third day, while they were still sore, can you imagine? So in those days, really, I don't think there'd be much of anything for anesthetics, anesthesia. Nothing really, not much for the pain. Probably some herbal, things. No antibiotics. These men would be super sore. And then these two men, Simeon and Levi, go and they do their bidding there. And I'm just wondering, has anybody had a chance to look up that Hamor? Is the name or the word Hebrew Hamor in the Hebrew, does that mean donkey? Can we look it up here? Can anybody confirm or deny that? Okay. Yeah, I got that here. It does mean donkey, actually. So, Shechem was the son of a donkey, literally, according to Genesis. Anyways, that's a little bit of a side note. So, yeah, the brothers come in and they take the flocks of Shechem, the herds, the wealth, and the women and the children, and they just really ravage the place. So what does Genesis do next here in Genesis chapter 34? Because the easy version of tonight is Genesis condemns this, but Jubilees praises this. And it is not quite what the chapter says. So Genesis chapter 34, again, let's go down to the second last verse. It says here, Jacob, this is verse 30, by the way, Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have troubled me to make me odious to the inhabitants of the land among the Canaanites and Perizzites. I am few in number. They will gather themselves together against me and strike me, and I will be destroyed. I and my house. In other words, my whole family. So Jacob's really troubled by this. You've troubled me, to make me, basically to make me ruin my reputation among the inhabitants of the land. I shall be destroyed, I and my family. Jacob's stated objection is strategic, not an explicit moral condemnation. He says they have endangered the household and made them vulnerable to attack. You've made us hated. There are more of them than there are of us. They will come for us. He does not say, you have done evil. He says, you have endangered me. So let's go back to verse 3. It says, his soul, this is Shechem. Shechem's soul was joined to Dinah, and the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young lady and spoke kindly to the young lady. So his sons answered him with a question: should he deal with our sister as with a harlot? And that's the end of the chapter. Just boom, like that. Nobody answers them. The narrative doesn't step in. It's just a massive cliffhanger here. Mary says, yeah, Dinah, not the concubine incident. In Strong's. Okay. In Strong's. Are you looking up Hamor in Strong's, Mary? Is that what you're doing? Thank you, Mary. Appreciate that. Yeah, so it's really, really quite an uncomfortable passage, the whole chapter. God doesn't speak. The question's basically not answered. Nobody answers it's just left as a big cliffhanger, basically. The chapter just stops on a question, with the brothers having the last word. I want to be, we should be just right up. This is a very uncomfortable chapter. Genesis leaves you holding it. A violated daughter, a deceitful oath, a city of dead men, a father worried about his reputation, and a question hanging in the air that the text refuses to answer. And I don't think that's careless. I think the chapter is doing something on purpose. Some readers come out of Genesis chapter 34 with real sympathy for those brothers. Some come out appalled at the whole situation. The narrative doesn't explicitly give the reader a simple moral verdict on the brothers' actions, which has left room for sharply different interpretations. So now the same events in our book Jubilees. If we go over now to Jubilees and we go to, say, chapter 30, and let's go down here to verse 5, and it says, "And thus let it not again be done from henceforth that a daughter of Israel be defiled, for judgment is ordained in heaven against them, that they should destroy with the sword all the men of the Shechemites, because they had wrought shame in Israel." Verse 6, "And the Lord delivered them into the hands of the sons of Jacob, that they might exterminate them with the sword and execute judgment upon them, that it might not thus again be done in Israel, that a virgin of Israel should be defiled." So here the Lord delivered them into the hands of the sons of Jacob, similar to that in Genesis. But here it makes it very clear that it is the Lord himself. The Lord delivered them into the hands of the sons of Jacob. So that is, it's a really good thing to keep an eye on there. Because in Genesis, this is something that two men decide to do. In Jubilees, it's something that God hands to them. So the author of Jubilees makes it God's working through the men, and the author of Genesis makes it just simply the men themselves that just decided to do this. So the initiative has moved up into the heavenly realms, if you will, in the Book of Jubilees. And notice which of our 5 tools that is. If you remember back a couple weeks ago there, we were talking about the 5 tools that we can use here in interpretation in the Book of Jubilees. So one of those 5 tools is called reattribution. And this is what we see here. The same instrument he used with Mastema and the binding of Isaac. Remember that story? Okay, so it was Mastema that did it in one text, and then it's God that did it in the next. So running in the opposite direction. So this is basically making this whole story justified as to say that it was actually God that worked behind it. It was God that did it. So he took the initiative here in this text and put it on God, but in the whole thing about sacrificing Isaac, the author of the Book of Jubilees took the initiative off of God and put it on Mastema. A lot of people think that Mastema is another name for the devil. So, yeah, same tool, reattribution, and he applies it a different way. There's another change. The chapter goes almost straight from the massacre into the law in the Book of Jubilees. A long section forbidding the giving of Israelite daughters to Gentiles, with the penalties we read before. Was it last year? Or excuse me, last night, I should say. Al says, shalom, everyone. Shalom, Al. Welcome and blessings multiplied to you and your family. Al says, great blessings every day. Thank you, Al. Appreciate that. Greater blessings multiplied to you and yours. Hope you're having an awesome evening there. Yeah, so this Book of Jubilees does change the text. Let's go back again to Genesis. Genesis chapter... let's go to Jubilees. Go down here to verse 17, and we'll read a few verses here. It says, for this reason I have commanded you, saying, testify this testimony to Israel. See how the Shechemites fared and their sons, how they were delivered into the hands of 2 sons of Jacob, and they slew them under tortures, and it was reckoned unto them for righteousness, and it is written down to them for righteousness. And the seed of Levi was chosen for the priesthood and to be Levites, that they might minister before the Lord as we continually, and that Levi and his sons may be blessed forever. For he was zealous to execute righteousness and judgment and vengeance on all those who arose against Israel. And so they inscribe as a testimony in his favor on the heavenly tablets, blessing and righteousness before the God of all. And we remember the righteousness which the man fulfilled during his life at all periods of the year, until 1,000 generations they will record it, and it will come to him and to his descendants after him. And he has been recorded on the heavenly tablets as a friend and a righteous man. So, the zeal shown at Shechem in this passage, in Jubilees, is tied to Levi's descendants receiving the priesthood. Verse 23, Jubilees 30, verse 23, and on the day when the sons of Jacob slew Shechem, a writing was recorded in their favor in heaven, that they had executed righteousness and uprightness and vengeance on the sinners. And it was written for a blessing. So here it's, and it was written as righteousness, written for a blessing. So you notice something that Genesis says, but Jubilees doesn't say? Can anybody guess in the live chat? Cubert says shalom. Shalom, Cuberts. Welcome and blessings multiplied to you and your family. Hope you're having an awesome evening there. Now, okay, so what did the Book of Genesis say about this whole scene that it doesn't say in Jubilees. There's a couple things, actually. The quote-unquote deceit of the sons of Jacob is not even there. It's not there at all. Jacob's objection is not there. Nothing, none of that. So the negative is gone. The positive is there, and then it's even blown up more than that by putting God behind it all. I can't help but think about how much this is similar to the Gospel of Matthew, and how the author of the Gospel of Matthew does the same thing with Mark. We take Mark, if you check this out in your own studies, in your own personal time, if you put Mark up beside Matthew, side by side, and you compare the exact same stories, because they're parallel accounts, right? Both of them are synoptic gospels. In other words, they're parallel accounts. You can put them side by side and compare them. So you'll see this is what happens. So Mark, being the first gospel to be written, is shorter, of course, more down to earth, not so quote unquote glorious, whereas Matthew blows it up more, adds a lot more bells and whistles to it, and dresses it up a whole lot more. This is exactly what happened with Jubilees. And this is a signature of a later text. So the deceit is gone, Jacob's objection is gone, and also the unanswered question at the end of the chapter as well is gone. So all of the problems are all gone in the Book of Jubilees. Now, another little side note, again, for those of you who are new to this kind of way of studying, 1st and 2nd Chronicles is also a parallel account of 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Samuel. 1st and 2nd Chronicles does the same thing. It sanitizes the text. You take all of the quote-unquote negative things and the uncomfortable things and the things that don't seem to make a whole lot of sense sometimes in 1st and 2nd Kings. It's gone from 1st and 2nd Chronicles and replaced. Even the names have changed, to sanitize the text a lot. So that's what happens. We know, by the way, that the author of 1st and 2nd Chronicles came hundreds of years after the author of 1st and 2nd Kings. Same with the Book of Jubilees as well, when it comes to comparing Jubilees with, assuming that the books of Moses were actually written back in his time. Yeah, so it's sanitized. Genesis stops on the question. Jubilees stops on the verdict. So, yeah, that makes a lot of difference. So we have, we have the zeal at the boundary twice. In Numbers chapter 25, Baal Peor, Phinehas kills at the boundary. He was zealous for my sake, according to God, given the covenant for an everlasting priesthood because of that. In Genesis chapter 34, Shechem, Simeon, and Levi kill at the boundary. Same kind of thing. Okay? The chapter ends on an unanswered question, and Genesis chapter 49, cursed be their anger. So the Torah has this verdict available. It did not use it here. So Baal Peor, back up to Numbers chapter 25. Israel is mixing with Moab. There's a plague running through the camp, and a man brings a Midianite woman in front of everyone. In that passage, Numbers chapter 25, Phinehas, grandson of Aaron, takes a spear and kills them both. And what does God say about this? What does God say about it? He was zealous for my sake, God said. And God gives him a covenant of peace and a covenant of everlasting priesthood for him and for his descendants forever. You see what's going on here? You see where the author of the Book of Jubilees gets this whole idea from? It's right here in Numbers chapter 25. So, yeah, Numbers chapter 25, in it, Phinehas gets the benefits of his zeal. Genesis 34, Levi and Simeon do not really. It's kind of like it's just left unanswered. And then in Genesis chapter 49, Genesis chapter 49, cursed be their anger at the very end. So both accounts, violence at a boundary, in defense of separation, rewarded with the priesthood. So when Jubilees says that Levi got the priesthood for what he did at Shechem, the author is not inventing a category out of nothing here. He is applying a pattern that already exists in the Torah. He is apparently, I think it's likely that he's aware of this and he's applying it to Levi and Shechem. And he said that's why Levi got the priesthood, and the same reason why Phinehas. So it's really amazing. I think that the author of Jubilees was just a genius, really. Again, I don't agree with some of the things that he says, but I mean, he's quite knowledgeable in my estimation. Mary says after the Dinah quote-unquote war is when they moved and Jacob gets his name changed to Israel. Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, that's interesting detail. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, so the Torah had that kind of theological move available back in Numbers chapter 25. It was used at Baal Peor. Phinehas got an everlasting priesthood because of it. But Genesis does not give Simeon and Levi that kind of explicit commendation for what happened at Shechem. Instead, Genesis chapter 34 leaves the brothers' justification unresolved. The story there's no ending to the story. There's no bottom line there. And Genesis 49 condemns their anger and predicts their scattering. So it could have given them the same kind of blessing here, priesthood. It had that precedent, it had that available. And it used it elsewhere. Numbers 25. But instead, Genesis chapter 34 ends on an unanswered question, and Genesis 49 ends on a curse. So here's a question that I have never heard anybody ask. But I'm going to ask you guys. Maybe some of you can look it up and let me know what you think in the live chat. Again, I am live on YouTube, X, BitChute, Rumble, Kick, okay? So let me know what you guys... Here's a question. Is this a clue that the author of Genesis was different than the author of Numbers? Could this be a clue that Genesis and Numbers were written by two different people? You say, Christopher, how do you come up with that? Well, Genesis, look at, it's right here, folks. Genesis 34 presents the same kind of vengeance, if you will, with Simeon and Levi against Shechem, as opposed to Numbers 25 with Phinehas. So Phinehas did similar kind of quote unquote, righteous indignation, if you will, or wrath against the wicked. And in Numbers 25, Phinehas was he was actually exalted for it. He got a few stars in his crown for it. He got lifted up by God and given a covenant of peace and everlasting priesthood, all kinds of stuff, no condemnation whatsoever. But in Genesis, it's a completely different scene. It's almost like two different people. It's almost like two different points of view. Let me know what you think in the live chat. Is this a clue? Would it be possible that Numbers was written, or Numbers 25 was written by, more specifically, Numbers 25 was written by a different person than Genesis 34? Don't take that as a soundbite. I'm not saying that's the absolute, certain, truth. I'm just asking a question. It seems like we have some clues here. So it declined to bless Simeon and Levi. And you could say, well, that declining is its own verdict. You see. So we have the same act and two outcomes. Genesis 49, cursed be their anger, says Jacob at the end of his life. Jubilees chapter 30, written about the very same thing. Now this is Dinah, Shechem, Simeon and Levi. Jubilees chapter 30 says, is written as righteousness, and a priesthood given for it. Genesis stops on a question. Jubilees stops on a verdict. And it seems to be almost contradictory. Hubert says, clip it. Yeah. You never know what people, I've had people take me so far out of context so many times, So, yeah. You got to watch it with some of these. Some of these people who make so many different claims. Thank you, Hubers. Yeah, so Genesis chapter 49, Jacob's dying, going through his sons one at a time, instruments of cruelty in their habitations. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce. Cursed be their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob, scatter them in Israel. All this stuff against Simeon and Levi. Seeming, at least, who would take that as a blessing? That's Genesis' final word on Simeon and Levi. Not a rebuke in the heat of the moment. It's almost like a curse at the end of a life when a man is finally saying what he actually thinks. Hubert says critics will always criticize. Yeah, when people, a lot of people, they make up their mind, to look at it from a certain point of view, and they'll never change. Unfortunately, a lot of people. Hubert says, let's try and learn. Amen. Yes, let's try and learn. Thanks again, Hubert. Appreciate that. Jubilees chapter 30, verse 23. Again, it says, and on the day when the sons of Jacob slew Shechem, what a writing was recorded in their favor in heaven, that they had executed righteousness and uprightness and vengeance on the sinners. and it was written for a blessing. So the same thing as what Phinehas did. Yeah, that's Jubilees. Cursed be their anger in Genesis, and written as righteousness in Jubilees. So as far as I can tell, and again, those of you in the live chat, please, if you want to double check on this or check me, if you will, it seems to be a claim about an absence, really, and those are the claims that, that I hold most loosely. Like, people would say, well, it's not there, therefore it proves that it was never there, which I don't think that that's a good argument. So the author of Jubilees obviously sanitizes the text here. And this is another tool that we were talking about there a couple weeks ago, omission. And this is one of the sharpest tools, actually, in the whole entire book of the Book of Jubilees, because what's been removed isn't just a little detail or an awkward sentence or a moment that made a patriarch look bad. What's been removed is Genesis judgment on Simeon and Levi as well. So, we have 3 things about how to carry out this interpretation of text. 3 things that we can learn here from this. Number 1, the wall is one wall. We talked about this last night by the wall. So if tonight becomes ammunition against a people, then that's not really what it should be. The wall is one wall. Blood, body, language, table, boundary, one instinct. Number 2, the Torah had this verdict and didn't use it. Phinehas, a priesthood. Simeon, Levi, a curse. Number 3, or verdict. Genesis makes you sit in it. Jubilees closes the argument, if you will. So the reasoning in Jubilees chapter 30 is not exotic. It's not it isn't really ancient history per se. It's the reasoning of a frightened community that has decided a boundary is sacred, and that whatever defends the boundary is therefore holy. And the reasoning is available to anyone, if you will, in any century about any boundary. So, if you're sitting there and, somebody is saying, well, thinking about a line, if you will, you'd like to see defended, impurity, you'd like to see protected. That isn't the reason to feel this way. So we need to be very careful. The Torah, which knew all about the zeal of Phinehas and had rewarded it once by name, looked at Levi and Simeon and decided just to leave it hanging, and actually almost pretty much cursed it at the end. All right. So I do have a critical thinking question here. I'll put this up on the screen. It's called In Genesis or Not. Worked example. The serpent in Eden is Satan, let's say, okay? Not in Genesis, the text says only, quote unquote, the serpent? A, God created the angels on the first day. B, God rested on the seventh day and blessed it. C, all animals in Eden could speak. And if it isn't in Genesis, where did it come from? Let me know in the live chat what you think about this. So here again, the serpent in Eden is Satan. Not in Genesis. The text says only, quote unquote, the serpent. So, what do you think the answer would be to this? God created the angels on the first day. God rested on the seventh day and blessed it. Or C, all the animals in Eden could speak. Let me know what you think here. I'm gonna leave this up for just a couple minutes and let me know what you think. So here we got, there's three things that people are certain about that are in Genesis. A is God created the angels on the first day. B is God rested on the seventh day and blessed it. And C is all the animals in Eden could speak. Which of them actually are in Genesis? Which of them actually are in Genesis? Okay, we have Chipmunk says, I'm going with B. Al says, I'm going to say B too. And Mary says B. All right, well, let's talk about this for a little bit. Sorry, folks. Thank you guys for participating. It's amazing. Thank you. Yeah, so let's take them in order here. So we have A. Okay, God created the angels on the first day. And so there are 3 claims here. That's the first one. That one there is not in Genesis chapter 1. It's not in Genesis chapter 1. The next one is B. God rested on the 7th day and blessed it. So that one we can find in Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 and 3. That one is in there. God rested. God blessed the 7th day. God sanctified it. And 3, all the animals in Eden could speak. That is not in Genesis either. In Genesis, it's one animal speaks in Genesis, the serpent. Again, that is taking it literally. That doesn't necessarily mean that it should be taken literally, but assuming you take it literally, we have one animal speaking in Genesis. That's the serpent, and Genesis introduces him as more subtle than any beast of the field, making him exceptionally shrewd in the story, but it doesn't tell you about what the other animals were doing. So yes, the correct answer is B. So congratulations, Chipmunk, Al, and Mary. You got that one. That was amazing. Yeah, so that's the only one that's actually in Genesis. Yeah, so see if we can pull this one up. Right here. So A, God created the angels on the first day, not in Genesis, but that's in Jubilees. Jubilees chapter 2, verse 2. And where it says God rested on the 7th day, that is in Genesis. Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 to 3. And then C, all the animals in Eden could speak. That is not in Genesis, but that is in Jubilees chapter 3, verse 28. Only the serpent speaks. Chipmunk says, finally one from the easy pile. Thank you, Chipmunk. That's amazing. Thank you. Yeah, so notice as well that Genesis chapter 3 does have cherubim. Genesis 16 has an angel. Chapter 1 has neither. So chapter 1 doesn't say really anything about angels explicitly. I know somebody can make the argument that, when God said, let us make men in our image, that it is talking about angels. Some people believe that, but it doesn't explicitly say that. Yeah, so let's go. What does Genesis chapter 1 actually say? According to Genesis, the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void. Darkness was on the face of the deep, the Spirit of God moving on the waters. We have light, the division of light from darkness, evening and morning. So that's it, day 1. That's day 1 in Genesis chapter 1. No angels are introduced. No heavenly court is described. No other created spiritual beings are named. Now, once again, we have to be careful about what this does and doesn't mean, because this is exactly the kind of point that gets overstated. Silence is not denial. Genesis 1 not mentioning angels does not mean that Genesis 1 is telling you there weren't any. Just like how people say, well, it didn't rain before the days of Noah. Or they didn't eat meat before the days of Noah. Well, just because it doesn't say that they ate meat doesn't mean that they didn't. So we have to be super careful with that. So here in Genesis chapter 1, it doesn't mention a great many things. It doesn't tell you where the waters came from. It doesn't explain the deep. It doesn't attempt to inventory every created thing that exists. It's a chapter with a very tight focus and a great deal outside the frame. So the honest statement is narrow. So we have to be careful to keep it narrow. The creation account does not narrate the creation of angels. Whether their absence is meaningful, that's an interpretive question, and a reasonable person will land on that differently depending on how you want to look at it, or what your position is. But let's hold the shape of that silence, because what Jubilees does is not fill the gap quietly. It gives an explicit answer here. It places angelic and spiritual beings into the first day of creation. So if we go over again to Genesis chapter 1, so let me just pull up the scriptures here. We go to Genesis, and we go to chapter 1, and we go to verse 26. Very famous passage. It says, Let's make man in our image, after our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So there's one verse in the chapter where somebody can say, like I said earlier, that, God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. Us. Who is us? There's several serious interpretations of this, of course, and they've been debated for thousands of years. One, of course, is the plural of majesty, like a royal we. That's an old proposal. Authorities, headquarters. The Hebrew grammar behind it is disputed. I'm not saying it's all the way true or all the way false, but let's just be objective here, and we'll say that the Hebrew behind the grammar in this verse is disputed. Number 2, God addressing a heavenly court. So this is another interpretation. Somebody might say, and there is the interpretation is out there that you see it like in 1 Kings chapter 22, for example, where God calls a heavenly, meeting, if you will, with all the heavenly host. We see it in Job chapter 1. We see it in Psalm 82. So on that reading, on that interpretation, there are other beings present. In Genesis 1 could be understood as addressing them without describing them, naming them, or telling us when they were made. The third interpretation of this passage is self-deliberation, like God speaking to himself in the process of announcing or deciding the action. And of course, we can't go too far without mentioning the fourth interpretation, the reading that many Christians grew up with, and that is, well, this is the Trinity speaking here. So, we're not going to dig into the meat of this tonight. We can spend an easy, whole video on this, no doubt. But notice what reading interpretation number 2 would mean for us. If this is a heavenly court, then Genesis chapter 1 does gesture toward other beings. It doesn't just describe, it just doesn't describe them or name them or say what exactly they were or when they were made. And that would make Jubilee more or less of an invention and less of an invention, you would say, and more of an expansion of a hint, which is, it's possible. But, let's just keep this in mind. Genesis 1 does not narrate the creation of angels. Whether it implies the presence of other heavenly beings is arguable, and one verse can be read many ways. And one such way is, could include that. Jubilees does something different. It doesn't have the question open. It supplies a chronology. It places these beings in day one of the creation account. And that's the seam, if you will, that we've been watching for these several episodes already. Genesis leaves the question unstated again. Jubilees supplies the answer once again. So if we go over to Jubilees and we go to chapter 2, and we read the first couple verses. An angel of the presence spake to Moses according to the word of the Lord, saying, write the complete history of the creation, how in 6 days the Lord God finished all his works and all that he created, and kept the Sabbath on the seventh day, and hallowed it for all ages, and appointed it as a sign for all his works. This is it right here. Look at this. This is a long verse. For on the first day he created the heavens which are above, and the earth and the waters, and all the spirits which serve before him, the angels of the presence, the angels of sanctification, the angels of the spirit of fire, and the angels of the spirit of the winds, and the angels of the spirit of the clouds, and of darkness, and of snow, and of hail, and of hoarfrost, and the angels of the voices of the thunder, and of the lightning, and the angels of the spirit of cold and of heat, and of winter, and of spring, and of autumn, and of summer, and of all the spirits of his creatures which are in the heavens and on the earth. He created the abysses and the darkness, eventide and night, and the light, dawn and day, which he has prepared in the knowledge of his heart. Wow, that's a mouthful. So we go back over here. You see here, Jubilees chapter 2, verse 2. Created on the first day according to Jubilees. The heavens above, the earth, the waters, the angels of the presence, the angels of sanctification, angels of fire, of the winds, of the clouds, of darkness, of snow, hail, hoarfrost, of the voices of thunder and lightning, of cold and heat, of winter and spring, autumn and summer. So in Jubilees, we have a universe with no unattended processes in it. So, yeah, that's what we have going on here. All of these things, the angels of winds, angels of clouds, angels of darkness, angels of snow, all of this stuff. So that is not a footnote in the Book of Jubilees. That's a staff, more or less. People often say Jubilees describes two classes of angels. That's not right if the claim is that there are only two. It describes many. The list that I just read here, what it does is it singles out two of them as the two great classes, the angels of the presence and the angels of the sanctification. So two at the top of the structure is a different claim than two altogether, complete and total. So the long list really is more interesting than just the simplified version of it. So because if we look at what most of those angels are associated with. In this account, it's natural phenomenon that we think of as weather. But in the Book of Jubilees, it's given to angel agents, angelic agents. That's not a decorative flourish. It presents a universe in which natural phenomena are not autonomous processes. They are servants. And you can already see the direction of the worldview of the author of Jubilees. Just as nature is ordered and governed, Jubilees will portray history as ordered and governed as well, which is the argument we spent the whole episode 5 on. So the staff is hired on day 1. And because there's a verse here coming up, in which we're going to read here in just a moment, where the man who gave us the English text that we're reading here thought something had fallen out and he put it back, which raises a question worth really a whole live stream on its own. You might say, how would you know, right? So we're talking about this. This is the man who translated this text, the R.H. Charles. There's actually a few different translations of the Book of Jubilees, but one of the more famous ones is R.H. Charles. So yeah, just like in many other translators as well, he puts things in there that is not necessarily in the original text. So if we go back to Jubilees chapter 23, we'll have a look here what we're talking about. Chapter 2. And let's go down to verse 23. It says, there were 22 heads of mankind from Adam to Jacob. 22 kinds of work were made until the 7th day. This is blessed and holy, and the former also is blessed and holy. And this one serves with that one for sanctification and blessing. So we have 22 heads of mankind from Adam to Jacob, 22 kinds of work made up to the 7th day, according to Jubilees chapter 2. 2 claims here, right next to each other. And notice he isn't leaving that for you to discover accidentally. He gives you the number twice. In the same verse, he puts the 2 accounts side by side. Seems like a deliberate literary pairing. It's not inventing the connection. It's right there on the page. So let's test this. Genesis chapter 5. If we open up Genesis chapter 5, and also Genesis chapter 11. Let's go and check it out. So Genesis chapter 5. It's one of those genealogy chapters, and Genesis chapter 11 is also kind of a parallel account here. So this is Genesis chapter 11 here. And then there's Genesis chapter 5. So let's count the line from Adam down toward Jacob. So we have Adam, it's 1. Seth, it's 2. Enoch, 3. Cainan, 4. Mahalalel, 5. Jared, 6. Enoch, 7. Methuselah, 8. Lamech, 9. And Noah would be 10. So from Adam to Noah, 10 generations. Now, then from Seth, if you count this, from Seth through Arphaxad, Shelah, Aber. So I have to go over, let's go to Genesis chapter 11 here. Right here. So Shem, Arphaxad. Then we got Shelah, verses 12 and 13. Aber, Peleg, Reu, verses 18 and 19. Serug, verse 22, 23. Nahor, 24 and 25. Terah, 26 or 25, 26. Abraham, of course. Isaac. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So if we count them, if we're using the standard Hebrew genealogy in Genesis and counting from Adam through Jacob inclusively, you get 20, from Adam through Jacob, 22 names. At first glance, that seems like, Jubilees seems to line up perfectly. But there is a complication in there. And it's one that we've already met before. A few episodes ago, a couple weeks ago now, we looked at a name that appears in some ancient textual traditions and not in the Hebrew text of Genesis as we normally receive it. It's the one that is found in Matthew. It's also found in, was it Luke? And it's found in the Septuagint. Cainan. In the Hebrew text of Genesis chapter 11, Arphaxad fathers Shelah. But if we look it up in the Septuagint, an older text, albeit it is a Greek text, let's go over there. So, this is verses 12 and 13. So this is the WEB version of the Hebrew. So Arphaxad, his son is Shelah. You go to the Septuagint, the same text, Arphaxad has a son, Cainan. And then Cainan has Shelah. So in the Septuagint, Cainan appears between them. And Jubilees has him too. So if we go to Jubilees, we go to chapter 8, it says, in the 29th Jubilee, in the first week, in the beginning of Arphaxad, in the beginning thereof, Arphaxad took himself a wife, and her name was Resuayah, and the daughter of Susan, the daughter of Elam, and she bare him a son in the 3rd year of this week, and called his name Cainan. So there's Cainan, or Cainan right there. So that is a complication. So that gives us a question. If Jubilees includes Cainan, then how can chapter 2 say that there's only 22 heads from Adam to Jacob? It's a problem. Is the author of Jubilees going by the Hebrew in chapter 2 and going by the Greek in chapter 8? If you count from Adam through Jacob inclusively, while also including Cainan, you get 23 names. So there's an internal problem here, serious problem in the Book of Jubilees, because it seems like chapter 8, it goes with the Septuagint line, genealogy, but chapter 2 goes with the Hebrew genealogy. So this is not as simple as just like, hey, a Jubilee has made a counting mistake here. It's a very complicated thing. There's another way to read the number. Jubilees says 22 heads from Adam until Jacob, and the wording can be understood as counting the 22 figures before Jacob, with Jacob occupying the corresponding position of the seventh day. And that actually fits something that the author says immediately afterwards, that the 22 works that come before the Sabbath. So that's another way of reading it. And 22 heads come before Jacob. 22 works come before the Sabbath. 22 heads come before Jacob. So both Jacob and the Sabbath are then described as blessed and holy. So the author of Jubilees likens Jacob to the Sabbath. Jacob is like a symbol of the Sabbath, or the Sabbath is a symbol of Jacob. Yeah, I know this gets pretty complicated, but this is what it kind of seems like what's going on here. So the number may not be a mistake. It may be. It may not be a mistake, though, depending on how you read it. It may be a part of the author's deliberate structure. And that's important because that changes the question. Instead of asking, why can't Jubilees count to 22, we should ask, what exactly is Jubilees doing here? What is Jubilees doing about this number 22? And that question gets even more interesting when we look at the works of creation themselves. Scholars have proposed different ways of dividing the creation acts into 22 works. Some group individual elements differently from others. So the safest statement is this: the text itself gives us the number 22. The exact reconstruction of every individual item is a lot more complicated than that. Chipmunk says, is this another interpretation for quote-unquote works? Well, that's an interesting question. Very, very good, Chipmunk. Yeah, very good question. Very good. I'm not sure if exactly, Chipmunk, if you're thinking what I'm thinking, but we've said this we've been saying this for a couple, how many years now? Probably about 3 or 4, at least 3 or 4 years, that, when Paul writes about the works, we're not saved by works. It's not by works, but by faith, yada, yada, yada. There is a Dead Sea Scrolls text called the MMT. And it says that the works of the law are it doesn't say this explicitly, but it does give us some clear evidence that the works of the law, as defined by the Qumran community, is not what we think it is. It's not obeying the Torah. That's not the works of the law. The works of the law were the rabbinic additions to the law and not the law itself. Chipmunk says, what came to mind is, I know thy works. Interesting. Thank you. Yeah, that's another way of looking at it for sure. I know thy works. Very good. Thank you, Chipmunk. The author of Jubilees makes this number 22 a highlight. The author clearly wants creation, genealogy, and the Sabbath to fit into one numerical pattern. The pattern is the argument. The created week has a structure. The human story has a corresponding structure. The Sabbath stands at the end of both. That points to a world where history isn't just a series of disconnected events. It's being presented as structured. So if we stay right there in that verse, so to speak, for just a little bit, because there's something that, we should consider here just before we move on. It's about the editor and the translator of the Book of Jubilees. So in Jubilees, back to chapter 2, and if we go to verse 23, it says, "There were 22 heads of mankind from Adam to Jacob, and 22 heads of work were made until the seventh day. This is holy. This is blessed and holy. The former also is blessed and holy, and this one serves with that one for sanctification and blessing." So, in some translations, not in the one that I'm using here tonight, but if you use a different one, I'm using the one from pseudepigrapha.com, but if you use a different one, some of them have a footnote visible. And the footnote says something about the translator here, R.H. Charles. In his edition of the Book of Jubilees, he believed that something was missing from the text at this point. So he proposed that there be an addition, a section that had, that he wanted to basically add into it. He believed that a section had been dropped out somewhere in the transmission. So he had a reason for thinking that. And there are later ancient writers who preserve a fuller version of the numerical comparison associated with Jubilees, including references to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and also the 22 sacred books. So Mr. Charles, therefore, proposed that those ideas originally belonged in Jubilees chapter 2, verse 23, but somebody took them out. So somebody chose where the manuscript is damaged, where the grammar can go two ways, where a word has more than one sense, where sources disagree. The good one tells you in brackets, in italics, in a footnote that nobody reads. So it's important to read the footnotes. That's where the honesty is kept. Read the fine print in your Bibles, in your Bible translations. It will tell you things like this, where the manuscript is damaged, where the grammar can be read two ways, where the manuscripts disagree, where there's older manuscripts. Sometimes it says, some manuscripts says this, some manuscripts or a few manuscripts say that sometimes they don't tell you exactly that it was actually an older, more reliable manuscript that says that. But nevertheless, pay attention to those footnotes, folks. It's pretty important. So, there are later writers who preserve a fuller version of the Book of Jubilees, of the numerical comparison associated with the Jubilees, including the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and also the 22 books of Scripture as well. So, Charles believed that those were original, and somehow they got lost. So, what R.H. Charles did was what we call a reconstruction. It's not something that we can simply point to, in the surviving Ethiopic text, for example, and say, there it is. But, it's a reconstruction put in there by the translator. So what you're looking at when you read Charles' note is a scholarly judgment. It's an informed judgment based on, external evidence and interpretation. It is a judgment made by the translator, though. Modern scholars have disagreed about whether Charles's reconstructed passage is genuine or not. So we need to keep that in mind as well. Just because he put it in there doesn't mean that that's exactly, just because he believed it was original doesn't mean that it was. So we can't say Jubilees definitely says that that there's 22 this, 22 that, 22 Hebrew letters, and 22 books. We don't have the manuscript evidence to say that with certainty. But we can say that there is an ancient tradition connecting those numbers with Jubilees. And Charles thought that the material had fallen out of the text, and other scholars had challenged that reconstruction. So that's exactly the kind of distinction that we want to learn to make. Text, evidence, reconstruction, interpretation. Let's not conflate any of those. We need to read the footnotes. Because when you're reading an ancient text through a modern translation, you're not always looking directly at the author's words. Sometimes the manuscript is damaged. Sometimes other manuscripts say other things. Sometimes a word is ambiguous. Sometimes there are other translations of a single word, even though the same word may be found across all the manuscripts. Sometimes there are multiple textual traditions. Sometimes an editor thinks something has been lost and proposes a restoration. Sometimes a translator has to choose between competing possibilities. Somebody made a decision here, though. The good decisions tell you when they done that. That's why a lot of people ask me, what's the best Bible translation? It's the one with the most footnotes. It's the one that tells you all the manuscript variations. It doesn't tell you, this is what to believe, No, but rather the one with the most footnotes. The one that has all the brackets. It's in the apparatus. So sometimes in a note at the bottom is where you'll find the gold. The most important piece of the text. The stuff that people never read. So we need to read the footnotes. Because that's basically the fine print, giving us the information underneath the text. Okay, so let's get into Jubilees, and we're going to go to chapter 12. And let's go. We'll stay in chapter 2 for a little bit here. Sorry, folks. We'll go to 17. It says, and he gave us a great sign. This is supposedly the angel speaking. The Sabbath day, that we should work 6 days, but keep Sabbath on the seventh day from all work. And all the angels of the presence and all the angels of sanctification, these two great classes, he has bidden us to keep the Sabbath with him in heaven and on earth. Now that is shocking. Does your guardian angel take a day off? Do the angels in heaven have to take a Sabbath? What's going on here? Jubilees presents a Sabbath as a great sign. And the angels are explicitly included in the commandment to keep it. Work 6 days, keep the Sabbath on the seventh. And notice who's being addressed. The angels of the presence and the angels of sanctification. The two classes that we spoke of earlier. The text itself says two great classes. Again, that doesn't mean that they're the only classes, but two great classes. They keep the Sabbath with God according to Jubilees in heaven and on earth. Here's another question. Does God take the Sabbath day every seventh day? Do you think that God actually takes time off? According to Yeshua, he doesn't. The Father is working all the time, more or less. And I certainly wouldn't want God to take a second off. I don't think that we could survive if God took a second off. So I do believe that Jubilees here is just a little bit too much. Again, I don't think that it really follows through, especially when you put it up against Yeshua's words and a little bit of common sense here. Jubilees, the next few verses here, chapter 2, verses 19 and 20, it says, "And he said unto us, Behold, I will separate unto myself a people from among all the peoples, and these shall keep the Sabbath day, and I will sanctify them unto myself as my people, and I will bless them as I have sanctified the Sabbath day, and do sanctify it unto myself. Even so will I bless them. And they shall be my people, and I will be their God. And I have chosen the seed of Jacob from among all that I have seen, and have written him down as my firstborn son." Jacob being the firstborn son of God? What do you guys think about that in the live chat? It kind of goes with the prophets where it says, out of Egypt I called my son, basically Jacob, and Jacob I've called my son. We do have that kind of thing in the scriptures as it is, but not explicitly like this. At least not that I can think of, not that I can remember. Jacob being the firstborn son of God, and have sanctified him unto myself, according to God, forever and ever. And I will teach them the Sabbath day, that they may keep the Sabbath thereon from all work. God says he will separate a people from all the peoples, and these shall keep the Sabbath day. You see the sequence the author has built here? The Sabbath is already a part of the heavenly order. The angels are already keeping it with God. Then God speaks of choosing a people on earth who will keep that same Sabbath. Jubilees isn't presenting Israel as inventing a new practice. It's presenting Israel as being brought into an observance that has already existed basically from the beginning of time. That's a striking idea. It's like, hey guys, we've been observing the Sabbath all along. Join us. Let's go back over to Genesis. We'll go to chapter 22, and we'll go down to verse 2 and 3. He said, "Now take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go into the land of Moriah. Offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I tell you of." Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey, and took two of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and he split the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up and went to the place of which God had told him. Okay, so we have God rested on the Sabbath day in Genesis chapter 2, verse 23. Oh, excuse me, guys. Hold on a second. You know what? We were reading from Genesis chapter 22. That's why I didn't. Okay, sorry, folks. Genesis chapter 2. Okay, we went right into the whole thing on Abraham and Isaac there. Sorry, that wasn't supposed to be Genesis chapter 2. Verse 2, the Sabbath. On the seventh day, God finished his work, and which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because he rested in it from all his work of creation which he had done. Okay, so the seventh day, Genesis chapter 2, verse 2 and 3, God rested, finished the work, rested, blessed the seventh day, three verbs we have here: rested, blessed, and sanctified. Somebody could reasonably say, well, God, resting on the seventh day and setting it apart, isn't that God keeping the Sabbath? And that's a fair question. Now, I'm not going to tell you the text couldn't be understood that way, as we just were asking questions here earlier, but there's different ways of interpreting this as well. In Genesis chapter 2, God rests, blesses, and sanctifies the day. The text does not explicitly describe a community of Sabbath observers there. In Jubilees, there is an explicit community, the angels, receiving an instruction with rule attached to it: work for 6 days, rest on the Sabbath. So that's been added. It isn't just Jubilees, as it has all the way along here, it's adding things. The idea of ongoing observance by a heavenly community. God in Genesis chapter 2 gives you a day that God hallowed, made holy, but Jubilees gives you a practice that's already in operation in heaven. So the Torah itself puts the Sabbath before Sinai. In Genesis chapter 16, Exodus chapter 16. A little bit. All right, verse 22. On the sixth day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one, and all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. He said to them, "This is that which Yahweh has spoken. Tomorrow is a solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to Yahweh. Bake that which you want to bake, and boil that which you want to boil, and all that remains over lay up for yourselves to be kept until the morning." So this is Exodus chapter 16, the manna. Israel is in the wilderness, and this is before the Ten Commandments is given. This is before Sinai. So a double portion is gathered on the sixth day. Moses said, tomorrow is the Sabbath. It's like they already knew this. It's like no strange thing. So, when some of them go out looking on the Sabbath, God asks, how long will you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? And this is before the whole thing about, again, the Ten Commandments and all that kind of stuff. So before Sinai, Sabbath is already being observed, and Israel is already being held accountable for it. The Sabbath is not first introduced to Israel at the mountain in Exodus chapter 20. It's already present in Exodus chapter 16. And the way that it presents it, as if it is something that they all should know.